We can go ahead. All right. Well, it's my pleasure to welcome you all back. And I'm very, very grateful for a very good day yesterday. Would you agree? You nod now, because obviously we're... this is a part where I suggest that we all silence our cell phones, because mine just did a ping. So I'm doing that. Things I forgot to do already. And thank you for coming out and joining us under the fin whale. Pretty fun. I was so excited to see you pleased and enjoying that adventure. We were at the Public Museum, for those of you who are watching us online. And our Public Museum fashions a very large fin whale, so we were having some fun underneath the fin whale yesterday. Welcome back. I want you to know we think of you all as family now. Wege Prize family. We watch you grow into your careers, and we really want to stay connected. So I'm sure Martha's already told you that. You've read us say that. We mean it, mean it, mean it, mean it. So please stay connected. We watch you on LinkedIn. You watch us on LinkedIn. And as I remind my students often, they might use other words, please stay connected with us. Link in with all of us. The geniuses in this room will help you grow your careers when you're stuck, when you need help. Whether it's about this project or other things, these folks are in it. They mean it. So we value the work you do in the world. We really do, all of you. And we want to see where you go, because it brings us joy and hope. That's the important part. So we're here for you today. It's your turn. The judges have been chatting you up for 11 months, giving you all kinds of what for and how-tos. And you've mostly listened, because you wouldn't be here if you didn't, right? You are the top 5 of over 30 teams who've applied. And so you've listened well, you've leaned in, you've taken their direction, and now it's your turn to think about asking them some questions about how did they get where they are today? What does the future look like from their point of view? And maybe get some insights from them that you've been wishing to know about that you haven't had a chance to ask. So you get to give it back to them. Just like in school, right? You give it back to your teachers. So I'm hoping you came with some questions, and I'm ready to invite you to ask some. And this is always the long pause that I'm supposed to be really comfortable with, because I do this in the classroom all the time, right? So I'll let you be very comfortable with that long pause. Does anyone have a first question? Great. Janelle. Thanks. It's really good for you to say your names so that everyone hears you, because on the screen, so say your name, say hello. Ah, that's a very good question. Who would like to grab that one? Judges. Oh, very good. Alicia.
just a follow up on that. As well is it's not going to get any better when you get out of school. I mean, yeah, you're suffering a lot of pressure and getting a lot pull in a lot of different ways, but once you get in business, it's going to be the same or worse. So you just have to learn how to manage that.
But I appreciate you'd like to be able to tell us that, or maybe ask for more clarity about some feedback that you've been given. So I think that's something that the Wege Prize team needs to think about how we input.
And we really do appreciate that. We really want to build it better each time. So we do ask for feedback, and we appreciate that. So thank you.
Yes. Money is always the limiting factor, right? Yeah. Any project for anyone, and also the time, right? So that's going to be pretty tough, you know. It's everybody's ability to manage those things. You know. You don't always need money to do things. It's one form of energy, right? So there's so many, money, time. And the students have the extraordinary energy, you see. That's what you need to get going. Never, I mean, you should think about money and time. But it's always there. It's just managing it right way. I have done some projects I call zero investment enterprise. And we don't look for money. That's not the first factor.
And remember, there's a little workshop opportunity following this event that maybe you can vet out some more of that kind of financing strategy in more detail, because each of your projects have different opportunities there, right? Yeah.
Here.
Go ahead, Chell.
Okay.
Chell.
I think we all come from very different fields, all the judges. And when we give you feedback, we obviously give it from our own perspective, our own career, our own experience. And we do try to write the feedback as clearly as we know how to. But I think with feedback, you've got to take, I think I've even written that in a number of phases. Like, okay, I'm saying this, but if it doesn't ring true, if it doesn't make sense, just think about it. Like, coming from where I'm coming from, all I'm asking you to do is to consider this in depth. Yet, once you've considered, turned around, if it doesn't make sense, move forward. Like, you don't have to take everything we say. But it just, from where we stand from and the way in which the construction of the sentence or the construction of the paragraph or all of that kind of made me say that. But if it's not relevant, move on. Do think about it. Like, oh no, this doesn't make sense. No, like, don't just, it doesn't make sense. Consider it in depth, toy with it, struggle with it. It doesn't make sense still, move on.
And Chell is our philosopher. So think about the makeup of our judges and how diverse they are. When we ask you to be transdisciplinary, we don't mean different nuanced engineering groups. We mean different, wildly different. The more diverse your teams are, the more transformative your answers can become. So if you look at our makeup of judges, we have journalists, we have business folk, we have chemists, we have folks from many walks of life here, soil scientists. So if you could think about diversifying your team, even the mentors and folks who advise you, and have a storyteller, have a visual graphic communicator, have folks who can help you really frame your content, you will get stronger, for sure. The more diversified your team, the more compelling your answers will become. That's not saying you're not doing great. I'm just saying build it out bigger. Calvin, hi.
Yeah, if I could just pop into with a question sort of on that point. Because all the judges here come from very different backgrounds and have seen ventures proceed well beyond this point. So I'm curious what, based on your own perspectives, what you see as the most critical elements for ventures that go further than this. Like, what do you see as being the most important factors to that?
Nathan.
Great question, tough answer. I mean, it varies depending on the team and the organization, but the thing I see most commonly is teams that are or people who are so wrapped into their own vision of what they're creating and have an inability to take on or take in other input, basically, not listening to customers, not listening to advisors. It's a hard line to walk between persistence and seeing something that other people don't. I mean, you're all in this competition because you see a way forward that the rest of the world traditionally hasn't, right? We built the wrong world, and that's incredibly valuable, but at the same time, sometimes there's founders, teams that just won't listen to other people, and I'm not sure if there's a good way to tell when you're kidding yourself or when you're being true to yourself, because I think that's two sides of maybe the same opportunity. Most startups, most companies fail because they make something that really nobody's interested in but the people who make it. And I think that's the biggest thing that you should be wary of is are people interested in what we're creating? Are we communicating it well enough so that they can see that they might be interested in it?
So what Nathan is saying is user-centered design.
Well, yeah, and not just
Human.
stakeholder-centered.
Right.
Talk to all the stakeholders.
And invite them into the planning of that work. Because if they're part of the plan, they're going to be interested in being part of the solution, right? Collaborative design is a thing that we teach here, and that's why we teach it.
And I have a comment on that. In my career, I always found benchmarking what's already been done is totally key, or you inadvertently do something that's already old. And it gets harder and harder because there's so many solutions out there, products, whatever. So in my industrial design career, I really felt I had to benchmark and then see if I could do something better based on that knowledge. So research and benchmarking was always key to me.
And that hidden assumption, not even hidden, the assumption that the thing that you've got going doesn't already exist. So I had a chat with another team this morning, I'm not naming names, that there was a comment made that this sort of thing doesn't happen or can't happen, and by the way, oh yeah, it does happen and it is okay. You really have to look broadly in the world to make sure that what you're saying is really true. Could be true in your town, might not be true in all towns. So really you need to check around, to check yourself to make sure your thing is really a thing, or if it's almost a thing, So that benchmarking is key.
Just picking up on what Nathan said, I mean, I think, obviously user-centered approach is really important. But I think you've also got to bear in mind, particularly from a systems perspective as well, you know, we're talking about this thing, circular economy, and certainly design is not a linear process. It's very much based on feedback, but feedback of users, but also about feedback of the system. You know, where are you, what's the context of what you're doing? Are you always agile? Are you always flexible to be able to shift and respond? And I certainly think that, you know, with startups, they start off in that place. And I work with a lot of very big established companies that are very locked in and they can't shift. So I don't know how you do it, but I think as you move forward and as you become firmer in what you're considering and your ideas become firmer, is to never lose that ability for agility, because the system will change and you've got to be able to respond to that. So flexibility and agility, keep shifting.
What Joe said.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. My take on it is timing is really key, and timing is not obvious sometimes, in the sense that ideas can be a bit ahead of their time, or the market's like not quite ready to take it up. And I think that's a really interesting angle to play, because sometimes you'll get feedback that people will say, no one wants this, but if you're patient, in 5 years they might. And so, you know, you have to keep an eye on like where you think things are going, even though people don't quite see that, or align yourselves with very diverse types of stakeholders who can give you very different types of feedback, so that you can kind of understand where people are coming from and not be dissuaded just on the basis of timing. So I think that persistence has to come with an understanding of the dynamics of, and it's kind of to the systems point, is that things are always shifting, the context is always changing, and being patient sometimes with an idea can allow you to time it just right.
I just want to give my own example. I studied the problem really hard. As hard that after some times it becomes me, the problem. And then I get the inspiration to solve it. Otherwise, pretty tough. If it's just literature search problem, it's a very good chance for failure. It has to be. You have to identify with it. You have to walk around. You have to go. You get a feel for it. And then you're going to have drive to solve it. You will never fail. Never. Keep moving. You just have to steer through. You can change the assumptions, but the problem is still there, the way to solve it. On the path, you can find right people to help you out. But your drive has to be yours, your own problem. You know, many grassroots inventors, they never went to university. And they have invented good things, very successful things. Because it was their problem. They want to solve it for themselves, for their community, for their country. And that drive is so important. Walk around, feel the problem, touch it, talk to people, and definitely you'll get there.
So I mean, so far there's a big pile of things that we've added, right? You gotta be listening. You've got to be flexible. Over here, the timing, and then don't become the problem that you're trying to solve. So it's a big thing, and then I think also from a systems perspective, you might be very excited about your solution, and you think that you've got it. And you're so convinced and you're so persuaded. And then the system pushes you out, because the system doesn't want that problem to be solved necessarily. Or we say we do, but we don't. And then the system feels attacked. So you've got to be subtle, and you've got to situate yourself in the right place at the right time by listening, by being flexible, by all of those things, but also being gentle with the system. The system cannot feel attacked, or it will attack you.
Andrew, you're my favorite because you're the only one taking notes. Just between Andrew and me, we just have a thing. Oh, you're my favorite too. Sorry. Two favorites. Okay, I do that in class too. You guys all wish I was your prof. Is there another question? Three favorites, sorry. Isabel.
I guess my question is relating to kind of, it's like a more high level in terms of circular economy and how you view the circular economy. And I'm curious kind of what different people's perspective on what the circularity and what circular economy is, because like at grad school we take classes relating to like industrial ecology, which for some people that don't know, it's sort of like the academic discipline and tools behind the circular economy a lot of the time. And some professors or like researchers don't think that true circularity is possible, or like there's narrow definitions that are very prescriptive, and then there's much broader ones that include kind of like incremental approaches. So I'd love to hear like what people think about balancing like ideals versus practicality and like what you include or not include in circularity.
I'm looking at the pros. So you have two folks here from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and they are circular all day long.
I honestly really don't know how to answer that question, so I might pass the microphone over to my colleague, Colin, who may spark off some conversation that I might be able to. Should we do a double act here? Yes. Colin, okay. I didn't, it was thrust into my hand. Okay, so what was the question? The question is about what is the circular economy? Well, there is a $1 million question, really. It does have a variety of different, people have very different understandings about what it is. Once you've actually decided what it is, then how do you apply it? And again, that's the $1 million question. I think for me, the question is that, or rather the context is that something like the circular economy is something, because it's a systems perspective, is going to be always evolving and changing depending on what and how the system reacts, etc. And I think that's very difficult for businesses and industries to adopt in terms of how they actually plan their businesses. But going back to the sort of basics of circular economy, if we imagine that it's based upon a science which many people don't understand, it's based on the science of complex adaptive systems, it's based on the understanding of regeneration and restoration, which is actually the opposite of the linear economy that we have at the moment. So it's trying to sort of bring the big picture up and saying, what is it that we can learn from these complex adaptive systems, which are actually more like real-world systems. They're the ones that actually operate around us, as opposed to the linear economy, which or the linear approach, which is very much a human cause and effect sort of approach. But so it takes those principles and it says, well, what can we learn from those, and what can we apply to our own economy? So it's an economy that is regenerative by design, and it has 3 or 4 basic principles, which I guess you guys have actually already come across. You know, it's eliminate waste and pollution, circulate materials at their highest value, regenerate natural systems, and also, very importantly, shift to renewables. I think one of the challenges that companies have is that as a systems perspective, you've got to apply all of those principles. You can't just pick one, run with it, and then feel that you've achieved circularity. You've got to adopt all of those at the same time. But also the biggest problem, of course, is the fact that if it is a systems change, it means that everybody's got to change. So whilst you've got some amazingly fantastic ideas, which we're all very excited about, and companies themselves also have these great ideas, it's very difficult for them to say that they've reached circularity, because until the system has actually changed, which involves policymakers, it involves businesses, it involves education, it involves mindset, all of those things, it's actually very difficult to say you've reached circularity. So it's very difficult to measure it, which often people really like measuring things so they can prove it's actually worked. But and like I was just saying a minute ago, it's something that changes all the time. You've got to be agile and flexible because the system will change. Again, that's very difficult to measure. So, yeah, I'm going to pass on to Colin now to see if he's got anything to add to that.
I think what we're doing, as far as I'm concerned, what I'm doing in my job at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, where I work in education team, is trying to help people change the way that they think about how the economy operates. Because I think the story that we all know about how stuff is made and used around us is inherently linear, and we all accept that that's the way that things are done. Or we don't necessarily think about it, because we think about the use of a product and not about what happens to it afterwards necessarily. So we're trying to change that in people's minds, so they think about what happens afterwards. And not just in terms of afterwards, in terms of a product being scrapped or no longer being usable, but finding its way into other uses, cascading its uses throughout the system, so it can still be useful for other purposes and for other people. And when you try to change the way that people think about how something works, you have to use elements of storytelling, you have to use metaphors as well to try and capture that imagination. And Joe talked there about using the living systems metaphor, which I think works really well. And it's something that we all inherently understand, but don't appreciate that this is a system we can apply to our own economy. Now, to those people who say it's not possible, as you'd put it, I think there are times, if you're being very literal about the use of a circular economy, you could absolutely be a skeptic about how it could be applied. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't think it's about being literal about its application. I think it's about using it as a way of thinking about how our economy should operate. And if we all, as designers, as entrepreneurs and so on, policymakers, if we all think in that way, that circular way, then we move much closer to a world where we are using the resources the way we should be using them, including the use of energy, of course. And it might be that it takes the technology some time to catch up. We see a great example here. I'm sitting next to Cellucoat, a great example of the way things should be moving, so that we are producing materials in the right way so they can go back into that system and add some value ultimately. So I think it's a story that takes a long time to permeate through all the people that need to permeate through, so that eventually all the decisions that we start making as designers, policymakers, and so on are those that fit with a circular economy.
Yeah, and just to pick up on that as a final comment, when people ask me what the circular economy is, and I'm feeling a little bit playful, I'll probably just say the circular economy is a heuristic or a framework. It's a way of thinking, because I often argue against the idea that the circular economy is a tool that can literally be applied to something. In fact, that would make a great university essay question, wouldn't it? Circular economy, tool or heuristic? Question mark. 2,000 words.
I think I can figure that out.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to give just a little bit different perspective on how to answer your question. And that is that the circular economy concept was a great step forward, in conceptualizing how humans interact with the environment. However, it's very anthropomorphic, human-centered. And there's a much bigger issue that has to be dealt with, and that's the continuing health of the biosphere. And that's bigger than the economy, because there's a lot of things in the biosphere that has, quote unquote, no economic value in the current system. So the benchmark I always use is, if you're doing something, it may not be perfect, but is it adding regenerative quality or health back to the overall biosphere?
Yeah, I think to your question, what I always think about when I think about the circular economy is just the very simple, this was from the book Cradle to Cradle, but the idea that a system where humans are good for the earth. And that's very easy to say, very hard to do, but it gets to the point that Bill just made, which is thinking about humans as part of the larger biosphere, and really thinking about what are the design principles for making our goods, the way everything in the economy, from a nature-inspired perspective. And I think it gets very, without worrying that you're part of a system that is degenerative by design, we can start to embed these design principles into the things we make without worrying necessarily that the whole system is yet with us. So for instance, the banana leather works with natural polymers. You don't have to worry necessarily that the entire system is going to ensure that everything goes back into the right place. If anything, in nature, when you're designing with a specific set of building blocks that nature reuses again and again and again, you don't have to worry that exactly that same polymer is going to go back into a precise system. It's a more diverse web of relationships that everyone uses that same set of polymers, everyone in terms of all these organisms on Earth, so that they can cycle in much more open-ended ways. It's not tight, closed loops that we have to make. If you're making a toxic chemical, you have to keep it in a closed loop, otherwise it's a problem. When you're using open loop systems, you can design with the same set of building blocks. And so we can think like that and start to behave like that as other organisms do. And that's a very biomimetic approach to thinking about the circular economy as being embedded in the biosphere and using these principles as our design strategies. And then the last point I would make is that the other biomimetic principle that's really important here, I think, to follow is that when we think about the system, it gets really hard. It gets really hard to imagine us as like creating a economy. And that's also not the way nature functions. Nature functions at nested levels of scale. And so when we think about the solutions that you're developing, you can actually measure and be much more sure that your effectiveness from a kind of regeneration perspective is working if you actually think of yourself as contextualized within a region. So for instance, your supply chains that you're relying on, how does that material go back into a cycle within a certain region rather than, yeah, it's a lot easier to get our heads around is to think about ourselves as embedded in a regional system that of course is embedded in larger global systems, but it kind of creates a context that you can understand and you can design for. And it's also more appropriate because some regions will have certain types of materials, for instance in the bio side, that are more or less appropriate to design with compared to other regions in the world.
Which I'm just going to say quickly, many of you are doing, and we encourage you to do. And you're taking these things back home and you're making home better, right? So that's really important. Go, Chow.
And adding to all the layers that you've already heard, I would add, for me, the circular economy is restoring and regenerating communities. And that's why my questions yesterday always kind of had it that way. And the well-being of a community has to do with the soil, because it produces good rice, and then, you know, they can be 3 meals a day. We don't need 7 meals a day. We're probably okay with 3. You know, we don't have to go the other way around. Like, well-being is well-being, is being well. But I think that to me is also an important layer of the circular economy that I think last night at the museum, I was talking for somebody from the foundation, and they were like, oh, well, I'm a little bit all over the place, and I do this and I do that, and so now I'm working on the river, but, you know, I'm not doing community engagement. And I was like, if you're working on the river, you're working on community engagement. And if you're working on community engagement, hopefully you're working on the river as well.
Excellent question, right? You got everybody chatting. Oh, I gotcha.
I really don't know what I'm going to say. It's circular economy in progress, you know. There is nothing in the world that is not circular. There's nothing. From atom to atom, right? From matter to energy, there is nothing. It's just the time frame. How long it takes, and what harm and good the things that we invent gonna do in its life cycle. So it basically comes down to life cycle analysis. Any project you begin and your final product, think about it. What you are producing and its life cycle. What's going to happen to it? But if you have billions of years, don't worry about it, because it will be finally, it will get back to Einstein theory, matter and energy, but you don't have that much time.
Question.
Yes, hi, my name is Charlotte. Thank you so much for all of your responses. And I think one thing that I've been thinking about through all this discussion of what a circular economy is how do we make people care? Because so many businesses and policymakers, as we have it right now, are very much focused in the now, the time frame of now, of what benefits us now. And even though a lot of producers are moving towards more greener practices and sustainable practices, it often comes down to just marketing, making it seem like things are greener than they are. How do we make people actually care about the root issue at hand?
We were counting on you to figure that out. All right, who wants that answered? All right.
So I'm a journalist, so I think that storytelling is huge, like talking to your communities, like getting journalists to write about the work that you're doing, like having journalists also like investigate whether these companies are actually changing their practices, if they're actually making an impact. I think that storytelling is huge for me in order to shift how people think and what people care about. So I think that's one way to do it. I think also we have to hold our government leaders accountable. A lot of them take money from corporations to allow them to make more money. They advocate for things that are harmful for the environment. So I think also holding them accountable and continuing to get out in the streets and protest these things because we only have one Earth. But yeah, I think accountability and storytelling are huge for me in that.
Can I just also
Yes, you may go, but I just want to say thank you, Deanna. And I want to add this one thing. You all are old enough to vote. Thank you very much. Go, Colin.
I want to say yes and to Diona. I totally agree with everything you said. But I think also, I think what's really interesting to me when I joined the Ellen MacArthur Foundation 12 years ago, 11 years ago, I'd never heard of a circular economy. It was not a phrase that we had invented, but it was one that's been popularized by the foundation. I was very much in the activist sustainability sphere that maybe you were talking about there, and very much disinterested in economy. And I think one of the flaws of sustainability has been it's not really thought about economy. It's in many ways been anti-economy. And that doesn't bring people with you to the table that you need to be there, because we need big corporations to shift the way they do things. We can all, and we should all hate some of the big corporations who have got up to some unpleasant practices around the world. But if you can shift the way that they operate and the way that they think, then that can have massive results. And that was the attitude that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation had when they said, what we really need to do here is speak to CEOs and speak to policymakers to say that there's a better way of doing things, not just environmentally, because that brings some people to the table. If you say there's an environmental solution we've got here, you'll get a certain audience are interested straight away. But then there's also a certain audience who put off, because environmental means more expensive, it means lower profits. That's what it means in people's minds. So we decided to go with economy, hence we use the term circular economy, because we wanted to really emphasize that this is an economic solution. And in all of our work, that's what we've produced, a way of showing that the economy can operate in a better manner economically as well as environmentally. Maybe we're a little bit missing on the social side of things, but there's elements of that in there. And we've found that that has been a successful way of garnering support for the ideas. And I think and putting the circular economy really into the spotlight, where we could argue that maybe progress could be faster in some spheres, but there's no doubt about it that people are talking about it in both an environmental and economic sense these days. And I think that's very much something to celebrate, because I don't think it happens unless you bring the economy along with you.
What's next?
I just have a point of, I think when we're talking about changing people's mindsets and making them care, is that it's important for us to come with, obviously we care already. Obviously we have a sense of the circular economy being a very important frame to bring people to the table. And I think we lose people when we become prescriptive about it. We become like, we've got the answer and you just need to be converted into this like new way of doing things, because we don't have the answers. We have really good ideas for how to shape the future. 100% I feel that the circular economy brings the right people to the table with the right sort of thinking and questions. But unless we have a learning mindset of continuing to kind of stay curious and stay open to the fact that we might not have the right way of doing things, then we turn people off. And I also think that not only we turn people off, but we might go down the wrong path ourselves, right? So having that, keeping an open curiosity mindset, I think is key, and continually challenging one's own assumptions. So I think one of the most interesting assumptions in the circular economy is that the way in which manufacturing is done today is kind of stayed constant. The idea that we centrally produce goods and ship them around the world is not really challenged in terms of the main tenets. And I think that's an interesting area of debate. There's others that are really interesting around the bio and the technical side of what's what. And there's just a lot of really interesting food for thought. And if we bring those to the table and continue to invite people into that conversation, I think we'll gain a broader audience as well.
Yeah, I wanted to echo something that Deanna said, because the reason why a story is so important is because it makes it personal. And people don't change unless it becomes personal. So somehow we have to make it personal for everyone. That's a tall order, because there's a lot of us, and often that happens on a really small scale. One way to do it is that we need better visions of what this better world looks like. We've been really bad about communicating that better vision. I believe this is interface carpet, probably, yeah?
Absolutely.
So this existed, and it exists as a exemplar of sustainability, because the owner of the company was bouncing his granddaughter on his knee, wondering what kind of world she was going to grow up in, and then investigated his part in that and was horrified, and so changed his company and his company's practices. That's how personal this gets. The other thing is, and I think that...
and I'm going to add,
yeah.
Ray Anderson holds an honorary doctorate from this fine school.
There you go. The other thing is we have to change incentives. So Gail's comment about voting is really important, because if we don't change the incentive structures, then nothing else changes, because it is always easier to do things the way things are, and the incentives are absolutely screwed up. They're
I'm gonna
not in favor of anyone.
Yeah, and I'm going to double down on the voting and say, run, be in office. It's not too soon. You are all capable of holding office. Go.
Never before has it been clear that truly anyone can grow up to be president of the United States.
Well, and your influence and your local governance is more valuable probably for the work that you will be doing. And I think that, to Colin's point, policy is where we really need to spend some time. You also vote with every dollar you spend. You vote with every dollar you spend.
A couple of things that Nathan stirred up, thoughts in there for me. Incentives definitely need to be changed. It's really nice to hear Banana Leather talking about how their product could actually be cheaper than conventional leather. It's great. No additional incentive necessarily needed there. But if you look at Cellucoat's idea, probably much more expensive than creating plastic, which is ridiculous. Of course it's ridiculous. So we need to change incentives there. But to your point about language, Nathan, yeah, it reminded me, I had a conversation last week with a major retailer in the UK talking about bringing in a regenerative range of food and the difficulties of even just using that word, regenerative. They don't know how to do it. because they're absolutely certain, based on previous trials, that it's a word that doesn't land. And we've all seen the sort of good food that's on the shelves, and it's got so many different names. You know, even look at your eggs, right? You've got free range eggs. You've got I can't remember what they'll call them. Yeah. What does it mean, right? And every time I see these, I just always picture them pretty miserable inside a cage somewhere, or a slightly bigger cage. So I think there's a skepticism amongst the people about what some of these terms actually mean. So it's a really difficult one to crack, and I don't know what the solution to that is, but you know, we have to keep beavering away.
Can I respond? Sorry. To respond directly, the solution is legislation, right? The reason why that free range doesn't mean what everyone thinks it means is because in this country we've allowed politicians to lobby, or we've allowed companies to lobby politicians to say, oh, we can redefine what that means so that, you know, it's actually a horrible practice, but everyone thinks it's a really wonderful thing. That's legislation, right? Like, so now we have pasture raised that's trying to position against free range, because free range doesn't mean what people think. So hopefully pasture raised doesn't get, you know, like, we could go on forever doing that, but if we don't have strong governance, we don't have any, feedback, or we don't have any a way of countering what are really strong interests.
New question.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are really interesting points. And something I'm curious about, sort of in line with this, is how do you envision, like, quantifying alignment with the circular economy? Because there's so many terms and, like, different, as you say, companies can lobby to change what a term means. People have different perceptions of what different words mean. So how do you envision, like, quantifying, like, how aligned a company or, like, a business practice is with a vision of a circular economy, particularly since we've also been discussing how sort of broad, like, that term is, and, like, how it's important to bring everyone to the table, but also, like, can that create confusion?
Yeah, I'm sure Colin and Joe have maybe something more specific to the circular economy, but the first place I would point someone to is science-based targets for energy. And the Swedish government and nonprofits are coming up with a protocol for science-based nature. So those are metrics that you could, as a company, subscribe to. And what you say is, here's what we think our impact on energy and nature is, and we're going to set targets to stay below that.
Yeah, so I think, what you're saying there, Bill, is quite correct. There's lots of, really interesting metrics and methodologies that you can use to assess various parts of the system, life cycle analysis, all of the ones that you've been mentioning there. But I think the big challenge is that because this is a systems perspective, then what we're looking for something actually measures something within that systems context. And there are lots of people working on this. The foundation itself has got a metric tool called Circulytics, which is ever evolving, and which businesses are beginning to use. But they're all very in their nascent period here, because we don't really have the knowledge to be able to do this particularly well. So my advice often to the companies that I work with is that, yes, let's use these existing tools, these life cycle analysis, these scientific-based tools, but let's have a caveat as well, just to say, actually, the human brain is actually the biggest and most sophisticated measurer, as it were, of the circular economy at the moment. I think we can just see whether we feel intrinsically whether something fits into a circular economy or whether it is circular. You simply using the principles of a circular economy. So, yes, there are these metrics, but I would, just add a level of caution there when you are using these, just to say, don't take them with a bit of a pinch of salt. Use your own brain to say, does this really work? Does it feel like it's circular economy? Because I imagine that you're probably more correct than some statistic that says, yes, I've met this particular target or not.
I'm going to absolutely agree with that, because statistics only work for people who are emotionally predisposed to that decision or that opinion, right? You can always come up with data that says the opposite of what someone else is saying. Not that data isn't important, and qualitative analysis is critical, but it's not the whole story. So there are many important things in this world that we don't know how to quantify. Happiness, love, fairness, equity. We haven't even agreed about what the measurements are for better impacts on soil and biodiversity, let alone society and equity and all sorts of other things. So quant can be a trap. It's two sides of the same thing. It's really important, and it's a trap. I see this all the time when I talk to designers that work in companies, because they're challenged to quantify the value of design. If you accept that, you just fell into their trap, right? So you have to figure out how to juggle all these things in order to tell the story that is going to actually move someone. And the numbers can maybe help, but that's just not the whole thing.
Follow these people on the line.
Big resources. On the theme of systems change and quantifying, I think one of the most important challenges to grapple with is often our impact as innovators is predicated on a system shifting. You're creating a specific leverage point that then has a ripple effect or some sort of chain reaction. And it can be really difficult when you try and isolate yourself as one single cell in the system and say, what is your impact? Because it requires others to react and also change in order to create that larger shift that is the way why you're doing it in the first place. So I think that a third kind of angle to this, in addition to the qualitative and being able to kind of intuit that you're on the right path, is really thinking through the interconnections that you are aiming to impact. And you don't need to necessarily quantify those, but map them out. Like, tell the story of, like, we're going to do this so that that happens, so that these people then come to the table, so that, like, this market suddenly becomes traction. You know, there's traction in the market. There's a new market that comes into play because of what we're doing now and laying the foundations. That kind of storytelling is super important, because then people can see, it's not just about you as an individual company chalking these metrics up for your impact. It's about you in the broader system, and they can then understand why you're doing what you're doing.
Colin?
As much as I prefer the answers given by Joe, Nathan and Alicia, and that is the way that I like to think about things, I think we also do need all these metrics. We do need to be able to quantify things, because there is a certain, and perhaps a very large percentage of the population who need to be convinced beyond the storytelling, who don't have the attention span to listen to our stories. I mean, like I said about the retail in the UK, they don't want to put the word regenerative because people don't have the attention span to find out for themselves what that might mean. So there's a great value to having some statistics. It convinces some people, maybe convinces many people. It's a question of how do you make those metrics as useful as possible. And I actually don't know enough about the tool that Joe mentioned that we use, Circulytics. My fear with metrics always is you might measure the wrong thing, and you therefore end up with somewhat mediocre results at the end of that. But I do think we've got a real need to be able to quantify what it is that we're doing, because it helps convince many people that you're going in the right direction.
It's pretty much in line with what Colin's saying. It's pretty hard to improve something if we can't measure it. So quantitative, qualitative, qualitative is pretty tough to do it, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. The tools will be coming soon. And we need to measure things. We need to measure. Without that, it's pretty tough. It's going to be
Well,
very like a political agenda.
and I'll just add that we have many audiences, and so we're shaping stories for many different audiences. So notice that. Deanna would notice that, I'm sure. We have 5 minutes, and we have some very silent people in the back, so I want to make sure if you have any last question, I think this is the last question. And welcome to Saturday at Kendall, when the mechanical system decides to go on at the wrong time. Sorry about that. But anyone who hasn't asked a question, have any compelling final? Okay, great.
How do you suggest that we optimize our language for different groups regarding the circular economy?
So there I go, starting a thing. Who would like to grab that one? Oh, Chell.
That kind of is connected to the question before, I think. When you have to have a map. You have to have a map of your stakeholders, and you have to know who you're talking to. And then you have to tailor. And you have to know what it is that they're looking, what's going to move them. You're not telling lies, but you are tailoring your message so that that will kind of resonate with them, and that it will make them collaborate with you, cooperate with you. And so that's how you do it. You have to have a good map, and that map, going back to what Joe said earlier, needs to keep growing. The map that you began with 9 months ago, this weekend hopefully has grown. And you have a lot of partners here. And then 9 months from now, it should be different too. And so you should keep kind of adding up more stakeholders to your map and figuring out who's whom and how do you talk to each one of them. And then that goes also with publications. I think yesterday I was talking to the Banana Leaf team at the reception, and I was telling them, don't forget academia. Academia is also important. You should be thinking about publishing there. But not only that, you should be also publishing in newspapers, local newspapers. You should, your brand, your Salucode ought to be perceived as and associated with your name and with your team. And so you need to be using all these different types of languages and types of media to make sure that you're getting more people on board, because the message, the storytelling, as Diana was saying, it needs to be there consistently. I'm not sure that helps, but.
Yeah, qualitative customer research is what it's often called in the industry, but qualitative research is going to be, you have to build that map yourself. Most likely, you can't trust other people's maps, or they just don't exist. Sorry for the more work.
Yeah, Zell's comments just reminded me of a good book I'd recommend, and it's on capitalism. And short history of capitalism. It's all about shareholders making maximum profit for shareholders, and there's been a lot of lawsuits when companies have tried to do circular economy things or sustainability issues because the shareholders say, you're not bringing me maximum profit. So there's a new movement out there, and it's called shareholder capitalism. And that's the name of a book. It was written by the director of the World Economic Forum. And it gives you a good background on how to think about stakeholders, who your stakeholders are, how to map them out, and what the benefits are.
Excellent resource, as is the World Economic Forum. Follow them. And you also might want to develop persona maps. So persona mapping, I can get you some info on that. But getting a designer on your team, hint, might be a cool thing too, because they can help you with some of those mapping techniques that have been discussed many times today. I'm very sure we're coming to close. So I'm going to close by saying, again, welcome to the Wege Prize family. You belong to us now. We are going to love you up for a very long time. So please, let's stay connected. Thank you very much for all your good and generous work. And we wish you safe travels wherever you're going. We want to know that you got home safely. So will you please check in with Martha? That goes for the judges too, when you get to where you're going. And with that, I bid you well. Good night.